Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the IGF Sessional Work National and Regional Initiative session. We know this is a newer session that replaced a session that was canceled actually pretty last minute, so thank you very much for joining us. We do have very illustrious speakers and moderators today. First, I would like to introduce Mr. Marcus Coomer. He has several hats, but he is here at the APrIGF as the head of the IGF SA Secretariat. Next, we have Ms. Izumi Okutani. She is a MAG member, and she's also the policy liaison for JPRS. Oh, I'm sorry, JP Nick. Sorry, Izumi. And next to her, we have our two moderators. First is Mr. Rajanesh Singh. He is from Internet Society, ISOC, Asia Pacific Bureau. And next to Raj, we have Chat, who you saw yesterday, moderating our town hall session on the synthesis document. Chat Garcia Ramillo, she is from the APC, and she's the executive director for APC. So thank you very much. Now, Izumi will give us a very brief update on what the MAG is doing, and please, Izumi.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and good morning, everyone. So I'm serving as a MAG member until this year from our region, the Asia Pacific region, as a technical community. And I'd like to highlight a couple of activities happening in the global IGF that's relevant for our region and have the opportunity to provide our feedback and input to the global IGF. So I really want to thank Jennifer for taking this initiative and picking up this theme. So there are three key activities that I'd like to introduce today. One is that there's a lot of focus on intersessional work activities. So it's not just one time, discussions at the meeting and stop there, but then have continuation on discussions on a particular theme, and I'll touch a little bit more on what they are. The second is that there's a theme being suggested that is expected to have like a horizontal or common theme to provide receive feedback from national and regional IGF to the global IGF. And the theme that is for this year, which is continuation from last year, is connecting the next billion online. And then the third point that I'd like to highlight is there's a lot of discussions on enhancing collaboration between global, national, and regional IGF. And there has been a couple of specific suggestions on how we do this for this year. And before I go into touch each of these the key activities, I'd like to give it a little bit of a context on what's happening, the environment around the IGF in recent years. So as many of you might know, there was a renewal of the IGF mandate last year in 2015. It needed approval from the UN to continue, for the IGF to continue its activities in the coming 10 years. So I think starting from around 2013, 14, I think there was some needs felt that the IGF itself needs more improvement. I think many of you have heard criticism that IGF is just a talk shop and it's just like, having discussions at one time at the meeting. There's no continuation of work on a particular theme, and there's no concrete visible output. So the MAG has started working on how we address this kind of issues from 2013 or 14, and these three key activities are one of the ways that we try to address it. So fortunately, the mandate was approved, and we were able to have the assurance that we have the IGF continuation until 2025 for the coming 10 years. But that doesn't mean that we stop the improvement, and it's actually the other way around, that given that we know that we will have the continuation of IGF for the coming 10 years. UNDESA, this is the department within the United Nations that is responsible for the IGF, has decided, hey, let's start hearing feedback from the key stakeholders. What will be the kind of improvements needed for the IGF in the coming 10 years? And we actually had a meeting in New York right after the open consultation and MAG meeting I think it was in mid-July, and there's a report released on the discussions there and what would be the kind of improvements needed. So that's the basic context, and then I'd like to touch on the three key activities. So first on our focus of intersessional work. So there are two areas of activities to it. One is what's called dynamic collision. And this is basically picking any theme that would be of a common interest for certain groups of people. And then they're able to have activities, have discussions on a common theme. So it can be ranging from something around the human rights or privacy, or I don't know, on accountability and public policies or gender, but then to be more specific, and there are dedicated mailing lists, and there may be like other activities that each of the dynamic coalitions may have decided. If you actually go to the IGF Global IGF website, there's a tab that actually says dynamic coalition. So if you tap there, you can see the list of topics and what kind of dynamic coalitions exist. The second intersessional activity is what's called the Best Practices Forum. And again, pick on certain themes that is of a relevant at the time. And the biggest difference between the Dynamic Coalition and the Best Practices Forum is that every year IGF picks what would be the relevant themes for like roughly 4 or 5 themes. So this might continue from previous year, but it might be a new one. So for this year, we have 5 themes. So just to share what they are: IPv6, IXPs, gender and access, the 4th one on cybersecurity, the 5th one, this is a new one, on anti-corruption, given the Panama paper was released. So these are the 5 themes for this year, and then there will be output document produced out of each of these best practices, and so that people will be able to see what would be the best practices on each of the themes. And I think what's interesting about it is that it's not a negotiated document that actually requires people to make certain policies, but sharing the existing practices that have worked, or maybe some that didn't work, but then analyzing the reasons why, and people can actually learn from what would be the good things that they can do when they consider implementing activities on these best practices themes. So that's the basic idea behind it. And again, you can see the from the IGF website the details there. So please find them if you're interested. And then the second activity for this year, which is again continuation from last year, is connecting the next billion and phase 2 for this year. So last year we actually had a similar initiative, and there was feedback received from several national, regional IGF on the theme of access. It was considered to be something that would be a priority and that is in sync with the Sustainable Development Goals. And what the focus for last year was to develop what would be the kind of elements that is needed for connecting the next billion. And the document was produced. And for this year, the work was to build on that previous year's work and to see what would be the regional or national specificity around this theme. So this is really relevant to our region, the APrIGF. What would be the any issues that's specific to the Asia Pacific region? And I think there are 9 questions being asked, calling for comments. I think until the final comment period is around until 31st of August. But there's no deadline being set for the national and regional IGF to provide more flexibilities. So that's something that we can actually work on to see what would be the input that we can provide as the APrIGF. And the third one on strengthening collaboration with national and regional IGF, I think I want to touch that later when it comes to discussing that part of the topic at this session. So that's all from me, and I think Marcus here might have something to add.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I was hijacked into this session at the very last minute, so I have not prepared anything, but thank you, Sumi, for providing this context, and maybe I'd provide some context to the context. But first of all, as Jennifer said, I'm here in my capacity as Secretary of the IGF Support Association, so I take advantage of this opportunity to make unashamed self-promotion and encourage you to become members of the Support Association. And let me briefly explain why I think it is important. We set this up. I was working then for the Internet Society, and the Internet Society was the main sponsor for creating this. It has two aims. One of the aims is to show through the membership that there is support, like you may have a museum or an opera in your city, and they usually have an association of friends of the museum, and that's a similar way it shows by joining that you are supporting. Membership fees are modest, $25 a year. We discussed that when we set it up, and that was felt that was a reasonable membership fee. If you join as an association organization, we ask you to provide $100, but obviously you can also spend more. And what do we do with the funds we collect? We support the global IGF, but we also, and this is important for you, the national and regional IGFs. We think it is important that they get financial support. We also gave support to the Asia Pacific regional IGF, and last year we supported, I think, 15 of them. Okay, our contributions are not massive, they're fairly modest, but nevertheless, it can make a difference for renting rooms and providing fellowships. And by joining, you are part of this movement, and it is also the aim to be a link between them and a link between the national and regional initiatives and the global IGF. Now, I said in my address yesterday when we started the IGF, this was not at all on the map nor on the agenda. This was not planned top down. We need to have national and regional meetings. They just popped up. I remember the first one in the UK, then there was a European regional one, then I was invited to East Africa, West Africa, in 2010, Hong Kong, the Asia Pacific. So they're in all the regions, LAC regions as well. So they're in all the regions, and they're really spreading like mushrooms. And why is that? And that's not central planning, that's just in response to locally felt needs that people feel, let's get together and discuss issues of common concern. And in the same way as Itsumi just said that there are other evolutions, I think you made it sound as if it was in a way a reaction by the MAC to some recommendations, which can be interpreted that way, but I would see it was a natural evolution. The IGF over the years matured. To begin with, stakeholders were not ready to engage in activities between the meetings. There were strong resistance. That's why the dynamic coalitions came. There were people who wanted to engage in a bottom-up way and do something. And now we're in the process of bringing all these initiatives a little bit more together. The dynamic coalitions, the national and regional IGFs, and the best practice forums is more of a central activity, which is under the auspices of the MAG, which is different with the dynamic coalitions or the national regional IGFs. I was at this retreat Itsumi mentioned, and I encourage you to read the report. It's a very rich report, but as always, a report gives just a flavor of the meeting, and when you're there, you get a little bit more of what is behind the lines. And again, I noticed there were two tendencies. There are those who would like to have everything a little bit more under central control or command, be that the dynamic coalitions, be that the national regional IGFs. And there are others who say, hang on, wait a minute, let them evolve and let them develop, and each according to their own needs and also to the needs of the region they're in. So we have these contradictory tendencies, and that was also goes back to when we held the first meetings of all the regional initiatives. There were some who saw them more as preparing for the global meeting as like a traditional UN preparatory conference, whereas others said, no, we want to discuss what is important for our region. And that was really a defining feature for all of them. The programs on the whole were totally different. A European meeting is different from a meeting in Africa, where access is a main priority. And I found that particularly striking in East Africa. The first meeting, I think, was in 2008. The access was the overarching priority. Then an undersea cable landed in Mombasa, and all of a sudden access was much easier. Prices fell down because Kenya had a good policy in place with competition. And all of a sudden there were other issues on top of the agenda once you have access. So there is a clear difference from region to region. There's no one size fits all, and that is, I think, a good thing as well. Let me lastly also say, now we have, and Izumi mentioned that, we have a 10-year program that allows for a bit of more better planning. And that idea, I think, found strong echo at the retreat 2 weeks ago, that many people felt there would be merit in having a multi-year program, that you decide this year we do this, next year we do something different, and then you have time to invite relevant organizations that maybe have not engaged. I noticed trade is an issue that is bubbling up increasingly. It's also on the workshop here. So if you want to discuss trade, then obviously you would need to invite people who know about trade, like the World Trade Organization. Then we could say, okay, let's have a meeting in 2018 or 19 where we discuss trade agreements and the internet and prepare for that well in advance. And that is also something I would like to encourage all of you who are involved in national regional IGFs, instead of just responding to ideas that come from headquarters, so to speak, come up with your ideas, make suggestions, and it would be nice to see ideas bubbling up that are dealt with at the global IGF that were coming from national or regional initiatives. Hey, the Asia Pacific Regional Initiative feels this really is an issue that ought to be discussed at the global level, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but maybe the year after next. That would be a very positive development, I would see, if you have a both-way interaction, not just top-down, but also bottom-up. This year we have tried to invite you, and I would also like to encourage you, subscribe to the various lists. Izumi mentioned there are these best practice forums. I'm helping to coordinate one on cybersecurity, which is an issue which is of great concerns, I think, to most regions. So please join these discussions, join these lists, and then also, obviously, we will have this session that we will discuss that later at the IGF in Guadalajara, where you will orchestrate a main session, and I look forward to that. I think with that, I think I have more or less said what I had to say. Thank you for it.
Thank you very much, Izumi and Marcus, and especially Marcus, because literally I grabbed him as he was walking into this room this morning. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to have Marcus share, because he was, at the IGF retreat, and he's also obviously the Secretariat for the IGF-SA, which he mentioned very thoroughly. And I do encourage everyone who does support the IGF movement to please consider joining, because your support really means a lot to national and regional initiatives around the world, and especially a big thank you to IGF-SA, because they have sponsored this very APrIGF. So thank you very much. With that, I'd like to go to something that Izumi mentioned, and she touched on very briefly, and this is the policy options for connecting and enabling the next billion phase 2. Now, just a very, very brief just a review. last year we used the APrIGF synthesis document resulting from the Macau meeting as, you know, a contribution from our region. Is not representative of our entire region because we have a very diverse region, but it was just, you know, part of the contribution. This year, as Izumi mentioned, the MAG reconfirmed the importance of this intersessional work, and so the policy options for connecting and enabling the next billion is now in a phase 2. And there was 9 guiding questions issued in the call for public input. There is a deadline originally, but for the national and regional initiatives, there are no deadlines because, you know, the MAG and the IGF Secretariat realizes that a lot of these initiatives are going to be held later on in the year, and they want as much input as possible from us. So I know maybe not everyone has had a chance to look at all of the 9 questions. I do have the first 3 up on the screen, and I'd like to pass over the mic to our 2 moderators, Rajneesh Singh and Chat Ramilo, to see how we would like to, you know, start the discussion going on what is important to our region and using these guiding questions as, you know, a jumping point to what we might want to say as an input into the global IGF. So, Chat and Raj, thank you.
So I tried to pass the buck and ask Chet to do this, but she said, no, it's okay, you can do it. Okay, so thanks for attending this session, which was, of course, put together at short notice. And I'm glad that the room sort of filled up a little bit, so thank you for coming in. It makes us feel good that there's people listening to us. You know, as Jennifer said, there's 9 questions that were put forward, which input is being sought for. What I'd like to know is that, you know, I'm not sure how many of you've seen this before or have had the opportunity to study the questions. But if you have, and you can also quickly read it now, I think there's some fundamental questions that these also ask. And when I was reading through these, when this list came out, number 1 sort of resonated with me a lot. And it says, you know, how would you define or how do you understand the theme connecting and enabling the next billion? So it's not just about the connecting. And as Marcus said earlier, that once the cable landed in Africa, in Mombasa, they had access, and then other things boiled to the top. So I would, at least to my mind, I think it, you know, there's an access issue here, but there's also a question about what happens next when you do have access and things start building up and boiling up in some instances. So that's one thing that sort of resonated with me. Of course, a lot of work has been done across the regions and across countries, within this region as well as outside. Another important point, which I think Marcus also mentioned earlier, is the fact that, you know, a lot of these issues, topics, terminology means different things to different people. And then there's also the issue of context. For example, in Taiwan, access and connecting people may mean something else compared to someone in Myanmar, as an example, where they don't even have the infrastructure, or at least not, you know, they have recent infrastructure rather than developed infrastructure. So these are the sort of questions that sort of came up to my mind. Jennifer, could you put the next slide on, just for the next set of questions? Out of these 3 questions, the second one, again, was an interesting one for me. What does meaningful access mean? So it sort of is related to a little bit what I said before, that, you know, once you have access, what is it that you do with it? There's, of course, issues of cost. Can people afford the subscription packages? And if they can afford those packages, then again, I'm talking about largely developing in emerging countries here, but as well, some of them more developed countries, because there's people at every social strata level. And, you know, be it a developed country or a developing country, you always have people who cannot afford the access. In Australia, as an example, where I live, there's a part of the population, and although Australia is known as a wealthy country, who cannot access the internet because they simply can't afford it. So I think meaningful access is also an interesting question to pose. And then, of course, there's the question about the SDGs. Again, I'm not sure how many of you have had a look at the SDGs. There's a fairly lengthy list. But one thing I think is for certain, to achieve a lot of those SDGs, the internet and ICTs will play a very strong role in helping us achieve those. Next slide, please. Out of these, number one really resonated with me. You know, for some of us who've been working in development for quite a number of years, you know, there's a lot of goodwill that goes into doing projects in a lot of countries around the world, in a lot of developing countries. You know, the intention is good, but often the project actually fails because either it's not sustainable, or there's not follow-up, or there aren't enough resources to support it into the future. So I think, you know, it's always good to talk about the positives and how good everything is, but I think it's very important as well to try and identify what were the issues, what failed, and how do you ensure that mistake doesn't happen again, or how can we do it better next time around. So again, that really resonated with me there. And then, of course, success stories are also very important. So, you know, we'd like to share some of those as well. So at this stage, I think I'd like to pass on the chat if she's got some comments. We would like some input.
Yeah. So maybe I just add that barriers are not only around on access, is on enabling the next million. It's not just about access to the infrastructure. I think there are many, and I think it is one of the things that we've seen now. There are many other barriers that need to come into the discussion. For example, barriers because of discrimination, and there are many barriers because of security considerations. So I think all that has to be part of the conversation, and it's been discussed all day yesterday. I'm sure there will be other discussions happening here. But I think those kinds of access that have, Marcos was saying, you know, it's a from 10 years ago, it's quite different now. So the barriers have probably changed. There are many barriers that have, well, there's more access. There's also new barriers that have developed. So maybe to also look at that in discussing or in the input around these questions. So I think at this point we want to invite others to, you know, to be part of this conversation and see what the issues, what other points or what other issues you're looking at.
And if you could just introduce your name and affiliation, it would be good for the remote participants, please. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Sita Laksmi. I come from Indonesia. I'm from HIVOS, basically. I would like to mention about the bias. As the Google yesterday in the keynote speaker was speaking about the mobile phone, people are accessing more, especially in Asia Pacific, through mobile phone rather than through PCs or cable. So that will be something really serious for me, because the smartphone or the mobile phone has different characteristics with the PCs, and the early adopters of the internet connections coming from the PCs. Yeah, people could not read books from the very small mobile phone. It's almost impossible to do it. We have Kindle now, of course. We have iPad or tab, but you know, it's impossible to expect people can be as access meaningfully as the same like people have access to others. So I would like to suggest perhaps some interventions on that, how to make access for the mobile phone more meaningful, especially for the late adopters of the internet access. Thank you.
So just to clarify, Sita, so you're talking about being able to actually do stuff using the mobile, right? As opposed to just
it has to be a specific interventions. If this will be a policy document, then there has to be specific intervention for people who have access only, and the first time they access internet is through mobile phone, because the quality of they accessing mobile phone is different when you have an access in your PCs or your laptop. So that there's a different quality. So I think there has to be a specific things to do. For the government in Asia Pacific, for example, or the government that has people more accessing through mobile phone rather than to PC. That's my point. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, feedback? Not enough coffee this morning, I suppose. Yeah?
So I think the comment that Shita made was really interesting and good, because there was actually a specific question that do you observe any regional specificity or local specificity? So, I mean, I think this example that there's a trend, especially in case of like, late joiners for the connectivity, you should think focusing on the wireless more than, through, or mobile more than PC, something that would be of an interest. Or maybe like within our region, like the Pacifics, they might have like, their own unique issues because they have the islands and it's difficult to have the physical fiber connection. So this would be the kind of themes that would be, really relevant in providing feedback to this work, I think.
So just on that, I've got Leonard, please. I'll speak while you walk up, Leonard, if you don't mind. I've had a long-standing rant about accessing websites using a mobile device. The number of websites that still do not understand that this region is mobile first, and that if you want people to come to your website and use it in any meaningful way, you need to render that website for a mobile device. Try accessing a site that is only displaying for a PC or a large screen thing using a mobile. It's very hard to use them. And it's amazing. Even, and I'll give you one example, Qantas, the Australian airline, their site is terrible, and they've tried to fix it, but it's just not there. I mean, and Singapore Airlines is not far behind, although they've improved in recent times. But, just two examples. And if you want people to come to your website and buy stuff and do stuff on it, I'm sorry, but if people can't actually read what's on your site, how will they engage with this? So that's one. And number two, I think there's also a language component, particularly in, we've got over half the world's languages in this region. So language will, I think, also come into play as part of that. So,
hello, yes. I'm Leonid Todorov. I'm originally from Russia. I work for Asia-Pacific Top-Level Domain Association, and I would love to highlight on question 7 about some examples when ICTs do not bolster development, and that concerns quite a big territory in Eurasia, which is known as ex-Soviet space, and in some Asian part of that, which is called Central Asia in particular, except for a couple of countries, we can see that ICTs, the widespread of ICTs and the internet in that area didn't help those countries, those nations to ensure a socioeconomic, a sound socioeconomic development. And I would say that, back in the 1930s, one of the wittiest Soviet authors at that time dropped in his, like writers do, they do some notes for future reference or for future books. He put something like, well, radio, everybody talks about radio, there will be a radio and there will be happiness. And here we have radio, but no happiness. So what I mean is that ICT is by itself, of course, is a very powerful tool, but at the same time, we should not underestimate the institutional environment in which this tool is deployed. And this is very important because sometimes we tend to absolutize this instrument and we think that, well, once the internet and ICT is there, the civil society is there, the government is much smarter and wiser and open and transparent, which doesn't happen actually, simply because people are human beings with all their prejudices and the customs and long-standing traditions. So I think that we should pay more attention to the interconnection between ICTs and that enabling environment about which we're talking at all times, and we should invite those governments and those nascent civil society organizations, not only in that part of the world, but also in some others, to think of ways and means of building institutions, contemporary institutions, modern institutions, or to revise current practices which may not be consistent with the challenges of our days. It's a very hard job because it's really easy to make a revolution, but it's really hard to do a consistent and persistent work in convincing someone who seeks benefits from non-transparent, closed, whatever modus operandi, like for many governments, in that particular area and some others. So that was just a quick comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other feedback? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Jelen. I'm from the Philippines. If you could just refer to the first page of the guide questions, and I would just like to pick up from, I think what I apologize, but we came in late, but I would like to basically connect my comment to what Marcos earlier mentioned about the trade agreements, and how do we connect the issue of connecting and enabling the next billion. It's good that we had the discussion on TPP and RCEP yesterday, although I think that was the only session for the entire APrIGF. But I think we have to also recognize, as someone who's pushing for connectivity, how it also has negative implication to displacement of people. It's like, how do we also try to balance human rights versus connectivity of people and development? I think as someone who's in the decision making or who was in a very good position to influence policies, how we as advocates would also influence agreements like, I don't know, like TPP, who we know would eventually really will have negative implications also to poor and marginalized people. So when we say connecting and enabling the next billion, who are we talking to? Who are the next billion? Are we referring to the class A and B, or are we referring to the class D and E? And if that's the case, we cannot just look at the issues separately but interdependently. And I think that's something that we have to look into in the next coming years, how trade agreements will have really negative implications to connectivity and to the lives of the marginalized groups. Thank you.
Of course, TPP was such a super secret closed-door meeting because you hardly even know what was happening. So yeah, I think there was a lot of dismay with the process, and unfortunately, with a lot of countries signing up to it, so with trade agreements, I think it also goes both ways. There are negative implications for sure, but there's also positives as well. So I think there also needs to be thought on the balance as well. Cool.
My voice is not very good. Can you hear me? Okay. Let me try. I think there is an opportunity for the technology to provide the free access for everyone. But the problem is what kind of free access internet you are looking for. If you're thinking about that, if there is a free access internet available in Taiwan, provided by Google or Facebook, I don't know how the people in Taiwan, in Philippines, how you are doing with that. First question about that. Second of all, who is more accountable? Is Google or local telco? Who is better accountability? I think it's not a simple question, but the society we need to understand. When we say we want to reach the next billions, what about open up your regulations, allow the Google to provide free access for everyone? And Google did that in New York City. And do you want the Google to do that in Philippines, when whatever countries? And you will see the telco will be face a huge challenge. But again, that doesn't mean Google isn't necessarily bad. But the question is, who will be the better accountability? Is a global company or local company?
I just want to echo what we were saying here. That's a really good point, Cool Wismay. Thank you for that comment, sir.
And maybe to add to that, I mean, there are also other models, I suppose, in terms of community access, in relation. I mean, there are models there already that are becoming much more. You know, there are more community organizations, or it's not simply, I think, just a national model. There could be community models as well, where you can, in fact, that can lead to empowering of communities, and there are models there. So it's not just one. It's not just mobile. It's not necessarily just a mobile model that is being rolled out, by companies.
Yeah, of course. I just take an example. Yeah.
Yes, Vanavit Akabutra, Thailand. Several hats, but I want to mention that I've been proposed to UNDISA during the MAC meeting in New York. Again, government have been overlooked. And as I experienced working in internet, it's the most complex public administration. You can write the whole theory about it. I've been studying up to the almost doctoral degree on this. It's the most complex public policy issue ever since democracy in Greece. Because you can look into the power we use, electricity. There are nothing engaged to the end users, to the community. Healthcare, nothing. They open the health hospital here and they're closing down here and there. They don't care. It's a government. But the internet open up what every government afraid is the filter mechanism or the way to control. There are the systems that need equilibrium all the times between the jurisdictions, the administrative, budget, international. Look through it. Government is a key, and that I propose to UNDISA. We have to advise how they organize this. I was always laughing when I heard that, like in UK, the first time Mac Covell introduced me, he came from the Ministry of Sport, Music, and Steve Crocker used to mention this on ICANN 50 as well, that the ministry that involved in internet is almost half of the ministry. Some of them cannot even tell the names, like in UK, Ministry of Sport, Art and Culture is handling the internet. In Thailand, there is Ministry of ICT, Science Technologies, e-commerce. We have 8 departments from 4 ministries involved. It needs to be organized, and that's what I've been proposed to UNDISA, that you need to coming up with the recommended structures, how every government is working. I look through the trade facilitation, why the TPP, RCEPs, and everything have been discussed, because in fact there is a recommendation they call National Trade Facilitation Board, issued by the UNCFAC recommendations, and it has been part of the Marrakesh Treaty. Everybody knows what they're talking about trade, how they organize locally, what is the structures. And I think if internet, DESA could be able to recommend how the national internet should be organized, and then when we're talking, we know exactly to whom we need to discuss. Because when I coordinate inside in the ministry, everybody all over the place. Some is in IGF before, and now we have to taking over. Some is that are the issues, that the structures of the government. There might not be in this IGF, but the government have to find some way to coordinate on this issue. But it's not so clear so far. Which are the platforms that the government need to discuss? Thank you.
Can I comment about it? Yeah, actually, this is a very good point. The government have to involve, because right now, for example, like a TPP or like internet governance issues, in many of the government in Asia Pacific, it's not sufficient enough to respond to that. or it's not involved deep enough. So I really agree in the next APrIGF or after, we have to do our best to invite the government people to participate in APrIGF, to organize them, and to do the dialogue and sharing, talking to the participant in the APrIGF to understand the issue we are talking about. So how we can say that is to make government smarter.
Okay, thanks for that. Being mindful of the time, I'll just hand over back to Jennifer, because we're going to move to the session on NRIs now, I think.
So thank you, everyone, and thank you for such a spirited discussion so early in the morning. I realize a lot of people may not have a chance to have coffee yet, but please don't, stop giving your input. And one way to do that, because if you haven't had a chance to look at the 9 questions, these 9 questions actually are in our synthesis document. So please go to the synthesis document commenting platform, put in all your thoughts. We really appreciate all your input. And, I'll have at the end of the slide, the URL for the platform, but mindful of the time too, I'd like to turn to the second half of our session, which is discussing the national and regional initiatives. I don't know if Izumi would like to say a few words about that.
Sure. So I just want to highlight a couple of key activities around this theme, and perhaps Marcus has additional words around what was discussed at the IGF retreat on this topic. So I think there has been in the past of talking about, hey, we should enhance collaboration between a global, national, and regional IGF. But then this year, I think there has been a couple of specific activities. First, there will be a main session at the IGF in Mexico on national and regional IGFs. How we do it and what will be the topic, this is still under discussions among this group that of the mailing list and calls that all the national and regional IGFs can register and subscribe to. But I think the idea is, rather than focusing on the specifics of how the administrative issues of organizing it, maybe discuss common issues that would be of an interest across different national and regional IGFs, or each of the national and regional IGFs would share what would be the theme that would be of a priority. So these are the kind of ideas that is being floated and still under discussions. And then I think there's an idea to have a more smaller sub session that would for each of us to exchange on what would be the facilitation? How do you actually organize it? What are the issues that you're and what are the challenges that you're facing? This is more of a sub session that is not a main session, and it's more relevant directly for the national and regional IGS. The main session, it's welcome for everybody, the wider audience, to join us in the discussion. So that's one activity. The second activity is there will be a booth, a joint booth to be set up for the national and regional IGFs, and there will be a brochure to be handed out. So I think each of the national regional IGFs are able to respond to the questions, and then the response to the questions will be reflected in the brochure. So I think this is something that APrIGF can consider, so that we will have introduction about us at this booth for the leaflet to be handed out. And then the third point, this is the point that I really want to hear your feedback today, is on how, whether or not and how to enhance collaboration between the global, national, and regional IGS. I think Marcus has touched that there are mixed opinions around this. So some feel that, hey, we're totally independent, so there's no need for collaboration at all. With the global IGF, we have our own theme, we have our own issue, and there's no need to connect. And there are different opinions where people feel, hey, we want to be able to provide the feedback to the global IGF on what's happening in our region or in a local economy, or here what's happening globally, so that as a reference of our discussions in our region. So there seems to be different discussions around this. And there's also an idea being floated on maybe it would be useful to have cross-regional or national exchange of information. So for example, APrIGF might want to exchange on information with what's happening in the LAC region or Africa. And so that was something that was mentioned as well. And lastly, I think there was also an idea shared on whether IGF Support Association can financially support participants from the national and regional IGF. I think this is just still an idea level. Nothing has been decided, and I think Marcus probably can add a few words on whether you're willing to hear feedback from the people here, or what's the status of discussions on this topic. So some highlighting the key points of issues being discussed, and I hand over to Marcus.
Thank you. Well, maybe last thing first, the fellowships, it's part of our statutes or articles of association of the IGFSA that we can provide fellowships, but so far we have not done so. But the idea has been floated. Maybe we should sponsor representatives of the national regional IGFs to participate in the global meeting. But this is something we would have to discuss internally first. Second issue, I think I would like to repeat what I said earlier. I would like to see the communication between the various levels, not as a one-way street, but as a two-way street, that the information comes up from the top down to the national level, but at the same time that it comes up from the national through the regional to the global level. And there is no hierarchic relationship between all these initiatives, but I think communication, if it is effective, has always to be two-way. And lastly, the cross-regional cooperation, I think, is an interesting idea. Just to pick up on what was discussed earlier, trade issues. This is also relevant in Europe, where there's a trade deal under discussion between Europe and the US, which is similar to the TPP, and similar concerns have been raised, and that might be an interesting topic to pick up in a cross-regional exchange. And on that issue, I have a past as a trade negotiator before I moved into this space, and this is what I like to call a clash between two cultures. It's the culture of government. They have a tradition, and you rightly said so, on trade. There's a long, long tradition of how to deal with it, but that was before the internet came. And when trade then touches the internet, then you clash with the internet community, which is used to a totally different culture of openness, transparency, and involvement. And I heard trade negotiators in Brussels say, what's the problem? I mean, we have been as transparent as never before, gave press briefings and invite people for briefings, but that's not the transparency the internet community is used to. And that is the basic problem here. The internet community is used to come in early and make their comments early on of issues, what is concerned to them. But if you do that in a trade negotiation, you will never end and you will never get the deal. And that is a problem that is not easy to be solved, but I think it's a good discussion to have, and it might be an interesting discussion for a cross-regional one. Thank
you. Thank you so much, Marcus and Izumi, for providing that very useful background and setting the scene for this the NRI discussion. I'd also like to point out that we have the IGF Secretariat focal point for the NRIs actually in our Adobe remote virtual meeting room. So Anya has joined us. Thank you so much, Anya, for waking up. Yes, it's 4 o'clock in the morning for Anya. So if you have any questions at all, any input at all, you are very welcome to also contact Anya. And thank you again, Anya, for joining us. I'd love to now pass on to our two moderators to open up the discussion again. I note that there's a lot of people from a lot of national initiatives around the room. So I'm sure you have a lot of input that you'd like to give. So thank you, Chat and Raj.
Yes, so that's what I was going to ask you. I was going to ask people if you can, especially those of you, maybe we can have a show of hands. I mean, who are actually involved in national IGFs or organizing them. There you go. So perhaps we can have then for people to come up and just give your thoughts around the inputs, the kind of inputs and the kind of participation, and also to respond to those questions around relationships between NRI and global, and also the cross-regional. Yes? What? Go ahead. I'm sure people will come.
From Thailand, Vanavit Akabut from Thailand. So I was sponsoring the NRI in Thailand in the past 2 years directly. Before that, it's also 1 year before. I'm one of the thinking that we should have a connection between the local, national NRI for 2 reasons. I think one of the issues that white government would like to go in there, because initially other government departments start to look into these like political movement, because there are a lot of human rights issue aspects, and there are several stakeholders that are around the internet working with locally contact. It's all volunteer. I do see that it must be that this kind of discussion should take place in the local, but it should be open to everybody. So that's how we step in and we try to help to facilitate this to be happen. We not even oversight, we sponsor and we nurture it to be growing. But the problem is the problem of administrative that killing them, because they're just a volunteer. They just want to arrange a meeting. They don't want to write a report. They don't want to do all this stuff. And I've been proposed that are there the ways that the way that they did to register or listed in the list of NI would have a benefit that they can have like a accredited or whatever stuff. So then in that way, the sponsoring organization locally will look who is actually linked to the regional, who is linked to the global platform, and having a way to organize themselves, making a report and open like the intention of having internet governance locally. They should open to all. Not only that, we also participate and we push the blind people in, the accessibility, and that proposal even go to this IGF in Mexico this round. We want to have the openness to every community that are the main purpose. And I do support that if there's a link, and if the regional or global could be having a way to accredit them, is like reward the committees who are arranging it, and we can be sure that it has been protected. The government should be supporting this, not start to talk that it's become a politics mechanism, and that's what my idea. Thank you.
Very interesting point. Thank you. So you're saying that you would need some kind of like acknowledgement for the work and the effort from the global and regional IGFs. That was very new and interesting point. Thank you.
Leonid Todorov from Russia this time, obviously. Well, we do have our IGF, and there has been just recently the 7th edition of that. It may also be recognized as a kind of cross-regional IGF because it's for the most part of Eurasia, because people are coming for our event from across Eurasia, including, for example, Mongolia and some other parts of this huge continent. I must say that as such, the event is sort of special because we managed to reach out to all the strata and all the stakeholders, except probably the government, because Well, the Russian government is there, but you know, I mean, I wouldn't say they are supportive, but at least they don't interfere at all, and we feel absolutely privileged to enjoy 100% freedom, you know, in whatever we say. So the freedom of expression is there. And sometimes we allude that we're like dogs, we're allowed to bark, but you know, the chain is there. So at the same time, I just I'm a little bit confused because my understanding is that basically the national IGF's recent experience have been recorded and put on paper, and we have Kilnam Chon in the room, and there is a volume actually. The volume you can, I would refer happily. Kilnam, do you have a copy with you? You do? Yeah, okay. If you could just... Where? At the reception? At the reception. So there is a book actually about a most recent book about national IGFs in Asia Pacific and the history and the modern state and probably some outlooks. And well, I would just refer everyone to that book, and everything is just recorded there. So I don't mean to say that we don't need this session, but you know, at least we have some definitive source for that. But seriously, if we talk about, oh, yeah, please do. I mean, here's no. Here's the man to tell you more about this.
Advertisement. This third book, if you want to buy, it's in registration desk, and probably this may be a good place. If you see you can see the. You don't have to buy. Okay, you can get the website. internethistory.asia. It's very obvious. And that one we update all the time. And here, if you see the chapter 4, Internet Governance, and the regional activity, but we didn't have the any volunteer to write on the APrIGF. We asked several people, and they said yes. And on the due date, no article. And I repeated twice or three times, then I just gave up. Then ask countries, not just IGF, okay, internet governance of any country. And country, I asked several, and we got a good volunteer from the Russia, and Taiwan, Kenny Huan, and Indonesia. The rest of them, I contact about 20 or 30 people. Either they say like yes, and no delivery, or they say like I'll think about. And it's really important to write. Even one page is okay. Then like if you see like 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, oh yeah, that's the sort of status where we stand. The record is very important. And the internet is beautiful, okay? Once you write an article, it's there forever, okay? Then like 5 years later, you can revise. Then we have a two version. 2015 version, 2020 version. We can just go all the way. But this recording is very important, and we volunteer this one, not just for the internet governance, for everything. And we did about the last 5 years. So please do volunteer to write what's the internet governance in your country. Even one page is okay. Because then later you can revise. Internet is beautiful. You can revise anytime you want. Okay, and if you volunteer, I'll give this one copy as a bribe.
So there's incentive there to write one page, not too hard, right?
If I may come in, Raj, on that, I think it's a very important point. I think if you just have a meeting without any archive, the meeting has not taken place. And the authoritative source is really the IGF website. And we have Anya on the call, but I don't think she has audio connection. But she is the one who traces them and who keeps the record. And we as IGF-SA, we just recognize those that are listed on the IGF website. And what she needs as IGF Secretariat is a contact person. She wants to have a document that there is an existing website and there is a report of the last meeting. So that proves that the initiative is alive and well. And I think that is important indeed. And for us as IGF-SA, if they're listed on the website, then we can consider giving a contribution. And we have also, you may have seen the flyer we published with a map of all the initiatives and those we have supported. It is really impressive, all the work you have been doing.
So, yeah, Babu.
Thank you very much. This is Babu Ramarel from Inner Society Nepal chapter. And I have few questions about setting up a new national IGF at domestic level. And we are working on a new, first time Nepal IGF in this year. So I want to ask if anybody can respond on it. What are the best practice model of setting up a national IGF? How to include government agencies and civil societies in best combination? What are the differences of MAG and Secretariat running different organization as Secretariat and various organizations coming into the MAG and again coming into the MAG from the government side as well? If any best model or best practices are there, then we can adopt that thing in a country like Nepal, a very developing country, is having bureaucratic influence in the system and civil society not that much strong from administrative or logistic point of view. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think Sheeta, you wanted to say something? Yes. Billy, you as well?
Yes.
And just 1 second. So
maybe
as a response to that,
please respond after me, because what I was gonna ask is part of his question.
Okay,
so
fine.
I think you can incorporate my question too. First, do we have this session as a regular session in APrIGF, like NRI session? Because I didn't see this session on the program and brochure that I was given, so I think it's not regular, but regular session, right? First time.
Yeah, this was put together at very short notice.
Oh yeah,
that's why.
But I think we should have this session on regular basis, because I think it's really important to know other countries' initiative and practice in terms of internet governance. So there maybe we can find the best practice in our region, like said by another. Yes, and then maybe we can put together our efforts in our region and best practice. Maybe we can find from our commonalities, and then we can go to IGF to share further with the global community. Yeah, that's what I was. Thank you.
Excellent suggestion, I think. I think that's a good example of how our region can actually feed into the IGF, based on our initiative, and that really has strong synergy with the activity of Professor Kim Nam-jom, and then we can actually share, those who haven't shared yet, their practices of how we have set up the IGF, and Nepal, you can just pick and choose on what seems to be relevant to your situation.
So what I was going to say before was that, the best person to answer your question, Babu Ram, is probably the couple of great initiatives we have in the region. New Zealand is one, Australia is one. I see Paul at the back there. And I think, Sheeta, maybe you want to talk about the Indonesian experience?
Yeah, I have two comments actually. One in Indonesian experience and the other for Nepal. I think Anya just sent us an email in the mailing list that the National Regional Initiative IGF at the IGF, we have manual and toolkits. So the manual is the basic principles of IGF and how you can have it in your own country or your own region. So that's a developing process. So I think that's good for us to have an access to that. The second one is about Indonesia. So Indonesia has just renewed its MAG IDIGF. So we have the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group Indonesia Internet Governance Forum, too much abbreviations, recently. So there are 5 people from 5 stakeholders, just being, I think, 3 weeks ago. And then Indonesia is planning to have its own IDIGF in October. May not be really relevant with the IGF Global at the Guadalajara, but at least we will start. I think I really would like to highlight what Wanawit was saying about the Secretariat. We don't have Secretariat, all the volunteers. It's really difficult to write a report. It's really difficult to, people have just a spare time to do it. I think that's really necessary, if possible, for the NRI initiative to have like a toolkits on managing volunteers. That would be good. So we know how to do it and how can we have a appreciation towards the volunteers. The second one is language. Yeah, there is. We are Indonesian speaking. We don't have that confidence. Not the early boomer now. I mean, my kids now know, but I mean the generation that we have now, not many people are able to speak English, and it's really difficult for them to engage in the IGF global discussions and then have to relate with the contextual level. So I don't know whether we have some volunteers. I heard a lot of initiative also can. Have many volunteers to translate at least the main documents to several languages that's necessary for Tagalog, for example, or Malayu or Indonesian. That might be helpful for the national regional IGF. Thank you.
My name is Sridip, and I would like to share a small, small story that happened during the recently we had the Sri Lankan IGF. So Sri Lankan IGF, what had happened was it was initiated by one of the Indian Society ambassadors, and what he did was he made the forum open, and I was also part of it. I'm from Nepal. I'm also one of the ambassadors. So it's like the collaboration, right? Internet is all about collaboration. You cannot limit it. And I was also the part of it, and I even did a presentation out there. So it's how we see the world. It's how we are going to collaborate. So I think the possibilities is within us, within our networks. We come to all these meetings and we meet so many people and we go back and we do nothing. So this is the main thing to do. This is the main challenge for us to utilize. There are people, there are resources, and we have to do something about it. Thank you.
Pakistan.
This is Mubashir from Pakistan. In a country like Pakistan, it's not so easy to bring all stakeholders on one table. So for that purpose, we came up with a solution. Last year, we had our first edition of School on Internet Governance at Islamabad. And this year, we are planning in a different city. Our motive to rotate the school is just to inculcate that knowledge about Internet governance. That people should come to know, they should know what actually Internet governance is. For most of the people in our country, it's like they mix it with e-governance. They think that it's something related to the government, to introduce technology within the government departments. But we are working on it. To bring all stakeholders on one table, we are introducing this school, and we are inviting reps from all those institutions and organizations. I think this approach in our country is helping us. And I hope that this school will ultimately go for our national IGF. Thank you.
So we have one more speaker, and then mindful of time, Jennifer, I guess we got 5 minutes left or something? Yeah? 7. Okay, she's counting.
Yes, Hiro from Japan. Maybe Izumi can explain it more fluent English, but I try. In Japan, there are basically two kind of initiatives for IGF, national IGF, and different origins. One is from the ISP Association, and one is from the Internet resource, like Taipei. And the first one is an annual conference for reporting what kind of activities are going on the internet governance. And the second one is a bi-monthly meeting. It's usually on a specific theme. We choose specific topic for one meeting, and the main obstacle or main hurdle for us to continue it is how to make it sustainable meeting and how to make it continuous effort, because we just gather 20 or 30 or 40 people in each meeting, and they are very not very newcomers. So that's one of the trial we are trying to do. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Byung-il Oh from Korean Progressive Network Chimbonet, and I'm a chair of program committee of KR-IGF since 2013, and we'll have the KR-IGF this year on September 23rd. One of challenges we have in my thought is the lack of participation, and what is the need for us to organize this IGF kind of event, because Korea is not a big country, and we have already plenty of similar kind of forums and conference which is held by academy or civil society or even in the National Assembly. So already there are many similar forum, and people who are interested in specific issues can attend and have a policy dialogue already in other places. Then what is difference of National IGF, which held once a year, from other many similar kind of policy forums? So I think if we identify the specific need to organize the IGF, we cannot attract people to participate in the National IGF.
Hi, I'm Ellen from Internet New Zealand, and we do NetHui, the New Zealand national initiative. I just wanted to sort of put forward, having been involved in NRI coordination work, that I think strengthening linkages is important, and that I think it would be useful to clarify that it's about two different kinds of linkages, one between the NRIs and one between the NRIs and the IGF, and that how it operates at the moment with that main process, both of those things get dealt with sort of together, and that there's actually something that many of the other NRIs have talked about, that support of idea sharing and thinking about the challenges of running an NRI is something that all of us, it's a very lonely business in that there's one per country or region, and that we share challenges, and the answers will be different for everyone, but that there's support to be had with those linkages, and that's very important, I think, from the discussions with other NRIs. But that equally important is the substance of the discussion. What are the key issues? What do we want to bring forward? And that I think both of the positive work we can do on both of those things are diluted by sort of trying to do all at once together, and that a bit more thinking about those two separate sort of needs or things would be really useful. I think in terms of the Asia Pacific region, we have a lot. I really appreciate this space, and there are further spaces today to talk about it, because the issues will be different. The beautiful thing about NRIs is they're bottom up, and you see the different issues, but then you see issues that are alike but have different perspectives. And I think that as a region, we have a lot to bring to the IGF in terms of content, to talk about both shared and not shared issues, but those different perspectives, and help bring it up. But a lot to learn from each other and to connect as well. So thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we need to end the session shortly. I'll ask Izumi and Marcus if they have any closing comments, and then I'll pass over the chat to wrap it up for us.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Alan, for structuring the different perspective issues. One is about collaboration between national, regional, and global IGF. One is about how we exchange information about organizing each of our national IGFs, and the third is about maybe common theme that we have of an interest. So we have 3 segments that it's worth continue our consideration and discussions. For the immediate action point that's relevant to the feedback to the global IGF. So there is actually a report from the IGF retreat that mentions it. And, some of the feedback that's here, maybe it's worth adding it as a specific suggestion. So, Jennifer, I don't know if it's relevant for me to share quote of that part of the IGF report and call for additional feedback. So it doesn't have to be about what's already written, but additional feedback is certainly welcome. So that's something that I'd like to ask everybody for attention and then keep in touch online.
Along the same lines, thank you very much for being letting me be part of this discussion. I thought it was a very thoughtful discussion, and I would strongly encourage you to visit the IGF website to read the report. And there is an invitation to give comments in a blog form, and I heard many thoughtful comments. I think that would be interesting for other readers of this website to read, and then there will be a more formal consultation process on the report. But as a first step, you can share your thoughts in a blog form, and I think that would be beneficial to all the other NRIs who are not from the region to read your thoughts. Thank you.
So actually we had a nice little message from our technical team that because we started a few minutes late, we do have a few minutes of grace time because I know we want to continue this discussion. Not only just in this room and with the remote participants, we do want to receive your input. And I really want to call attention to, we are having actually organized by the NRI Focal Point Anya Gengo, and also Marilyn Cade, who is the NRI coordinator. There will be an NRI call this Friday, and I believe it is 1400 UTC, so it's actually going to be 10 o'clock Taipei time. So if anyone is still awake then, or finished with dinner, please do join this call. And on this call, we will be talking about this main session, trying to finalize the topics that we want as NRIs to bring to the main IGF session in Guadalajara later this year. And there will be discussion also on the development of a toolkit. I know a lot of people today has mentioned, the challenges facing, organizing a new national initiative, how Marcus and Izumi and a lot of people in this room also mentioned there is no one-size-fit-all solution. So it is actually very important for us to, come up with this resource to help others, grassroots levels, bottom-up development of people who want to organize within their own country or economy a national initiative. So please do join this call, and all this information is available on the IGF website. If you want to be listed, or if you're concerned or confused about what the criteria might be, I urge you to reach out to the IGF Secretariat focal point. So thank you very much for attending this really early morning special session, because we really did, as Raj mentioned and also Marcus mentioned, and actually this is actually a session that was put together very last minute, but noted that the input from participants in this room that this session is actually very, very valuable. So we will absolutely try to continue this session in the APrIGF events in the future, to have a space for NRIs to discuss, to have a space for us to reflect what we discuss in this region back to the IGF, whatever channels, whatever ways, whatever inputs that we think is most appropriate to come from this region. And of course, we don't, presume to speak for everyone in the region, because we are a very diverse region. So any individual input you would like to give, I urge you also to go to the IGF website and submit your input, because there is a lot of call for inputs out right now. As Izumi and Marcus mentioned, there is the report from the IGF retreat that is out for public consultation. There's also the 9 questions that we need to consider as, as a region, what we want to do about, policy options for connecting and enabling the next million. And obviously there's also the NRI initiatives where we want what we want to say at the main session. So I know there's a lot of work that we need to do, a lot of input from everyone around this room. So if you have any questions, please do email the Secretariat at this email that's on the screen right now. And thank you so much for attending.